Well, hello again, my friends and fellow members of the Invisible College. Today I've got something really different for you and rather special. As you maybe remember, if you've been following this channel for a long time, I did an interview a long time back, I think about 2009 or something, 10, with J.J. Hurtak, a remarkable man, the author of a famous book called The Keys of Enoch. And I did a review of that book and I asked him a lot of questions. We sat together over in the corner and I asked him questions about that book. So I'm not going to go into that in depth now. But he's come to visit us and I thought it would be rather fun to, instead of me just chatting with him, it would put him in front of a camera and see what he's got to say and record it, and everybody else can share in these new things he's got to talk about. For those of you who don't know, a little bit of blurb about him. Dr. James Hurtak, PhD in Social Science, University of California, PhD in History, University of Minnesota, is the author of numerous articles and currently works with the Academy for Future Science, being involved especially with environmental and exploratory projects in Africa and Asia. Now, I happen to know he's also involved with the jurisprudence, the laws that are being drawn up and suggested for what should happen on Mars. Since the discovery of water on Mars, it's now becoming increasingly likely that people are going to go there. And you probably know that SpaceX is very much involved in building rockets to take people to colonize Mars. Now, I don't know what you think about that. I rather think it's a rather pointless thing to do, but it's probably going to happen, or at least attempts are going to be made. So they need to have some kind of legal framework for how nations are going to work together on Mars. We don't want another situation like on Earth with people fighting wars against each other. So I think that's an interesting area to investigate. But he's been involved in many other things before that. He was very closely involved with the Stanford Research Institute, worked with Russell Targ for I think something like 25 years. He also knew Andrija Puharich. He seems like a really fascinating man. I wish I had met him. I think he died in the 90s or maybe a bit earlier than that even. But he was involved in a lot of parapsychology investigations, and he was the man who brought Uri Geller to the West from Israel, brought them to America, to the Stanford Research Institute, and they were investigating psi, parapsychology, which I prefer to call the supernatural. That we do have supernatural powers if we awaken them. And one of those is distant viewing, being able to see things in our mind's eye at a distance. And if you have seen that film, Men Who Stare at Goats, that's actually based on this work that was going on in the Stanford Research Institute and other places, trying to find psychics who could see in the distance and spy on the Russians or the Soviets, as it would have been at that time, to see what they're up to. And it's lampooned in that movie, Men Who Stare at Goats. And if you haven't seen it, I do recommend you go and watch that. Anyway, JJ was involved in that work. He was also involved with Phyllis Schlemmer for about 25 years, and she was doing a lot of work contacting alien intelligences. And there's whole books written on that. It's not my work, but I do like to see what other people are up to. And he's also been involved very much in pyramid research, which is my work, but he's got a very different approach. And he'll talk a bit about that as well. So I think, keep an open mind and enjoy, and let's see where this takes us, because I don't know. We'll see where it goes. So on with the show. So there we are. Welcome to Awin Lodge. Dr. J.J. Hurtak and Dr. Desiree Hurtak.
We're very happy to be with you. We admire your work, and we have so many interesting subjects to cover in this conversation. But let's pick one that we feel that the audience will enjoy, which of course is our work in Egypt.
Exactly, because Adrian, you've done so much great work in Egypt, several books and topics, and so our most recent book, one of them, is called Giza's Industrial Complex.
Right.
And the reason for that is because we feel that they had a more sophisticated technology than what people believe.
Well, that's pretty obvious to anyone who's got the eyes to see, you know.
But what's interesting about this is they actually, we believe, used a type of hydrogen energy, which if we would use that today, could help a lot of us, you know, could help the planet.
Right. In fact, one of the interesting details is the saltwater battery that the Egyptians were able to master, and perhaps this is the source of the lighting technique that was used in the vast underground tunnel system underneath the Giza Plateau. So several years ago, we were given the privilege of taking ground-penetrating radar beneath the Giza Plateau, and as you know, we made the original discovery of the tomb of Osiris in 1997. Later in 1999, Zai Hawass, the great Egyptian authority, took advantage of this research and claimed it as his own finding. But we were there as the original research team. We actually filmed the whole underground complex. He did say, incidentally, there was a group 2 years before that did this research on Fox television in 1999. So to bring this full circle, we're still continuing the research using remote sensing technology.
Well, what's interesting is you see there, and you see in other places, even down the Nile, that not only is water flowing under some of the pyramids, and that was true for the tomb of Osiris, there was water, and one of the reasons we were able to be the ones to really explore that tomb is we knew it was a time when the water levels were low, and we could get in there, and we still saw water. Of course, we were about 30 meters deep, which is almost 100 feet, but there was water around the moat and water inside where we believe the original tomb was. But we don't even think that these are all tombs, because as you know, Adrian, a lot of these tombs don't seem to have bodies in them. Now, maybe for some reason, you know, some earlier grave robbers moved the mummies, but, you know, we're also using similar structures today to capture and hold, we'll say, certain types of nuclear waste products, or even hydrogen gas, we believe.
Right. Even Mark Lerner, the critic of some of this research, has said, quote unquote, the pyramids were never meant as tombs. In other words, there was some other alternative purpose. We believe that they were energy storage areas, and that the very shape of the pyramidal geometry invokes a type of vortex energy.
Right, I'm going to show this interesting picture. It's actually from a Russian book that we were able to find, and this is in the area of El Fayum, Lake Morris. Now, El Fayum is an interesting pyramid. It also has water underneath it. Why do you build pyramids when the water's underneath?
Can I butt in here?
Yes, please do.
One of the things that always struck me about the pyramids, the Giza pyramids in particular, is the lack of any kind of inscriptions. And I have this feeling, or call it a belief if you like, that the people of the Old Kingdom were very advanced and very spiritual, but that later in the Egyptian history it became corrupted, and that's why in the New Kingdom you have so much writing and casting spells and all that kind of stuff going on. I don't believe the Old Kingdom was like that. And this idea of the pyramids technology, it's not an area I've investigated myself, but it's very obvious that they knew a lot about mathematics and about the Earth and about the position of it and the relationship of the Earth to the Sun and all of that kind of thing. So this is, I believe, the kind of knowledge we need to get back to. It's simple. At roots, the most important things are simple. And when we make things complicated, it usually means we're moving away from the center.
Exactly, we agree with you. I studied Egyptology at the University of Chicago, and as a young scholar, went to Egypt to learn the Coptic language and study Coptic text
Right.
called the Nag Hammadi text.
Right.
And I was rather surprised that one of the texts, called the Letter of Asclepius,
Right.
speaks of Egypt, or the area of the pyramids, as the schoolhouse of the gods. And when knowledge waned, or shall we say fell to a low ebb, the gods left Egypt. And it was
Yes.
the land of corpses and tombs, quote unquote, from the Coptic. And so I was inspired to really leave behind my formal studies in Egyptology, and as a young scientist using remote sensing technology,
Yes.
musical instruments, working with geologists and linguists to look at pyramids around the world. And amazingly, Desiree and I discovered and published in several magazines and journals the fact that the pyramids in Mexico follow the same musical vibratory arrangement as the chambers inside the Great Pyramid, one of which shows, as I can point this to the camera, a brilliant light flash that took place when we were singing mantras.
Right.
Now, I have had a very good voice at one time, and as I was singing in the ancient Egyptian and also the ancient Hebrew Aramaic, suddenly the energy built up to such a high intensity that standing columnar waves of energy came up and down the Grand Gallery. What we're seeing here in the flash of light was this magnificent light that manifested throughout the entirety of the inner tomb.
Can I butt in here? I've been working hard on the Book of Revelation, and I'm just coming up to the chapter about the New Jerusalem coming
Yes.
down from heaven,
Yes,
and it's self-illuminating. It doesn't need the sun.
correct.
Everything is illuminated, and that sounds to me kind of similar to what you're talking about. And the other thing I put in my lectures is the idea that ancient Egyptian culture is the prequel to the Bible. And it's like in Star Wars, you see that rolling screen going up.
Right.
That's the first part of Genesis, is that equivalent. You're seeing this rolling screen. But if you want the full story, you need to watch the prequel, which is actually Egypt.
Yes, one could argue that the Great Pyramid is the Bible in stone.
Yes.
And we know in Acts that it says Moses had all the wisdom of Egypt. In fact, he was powerful in his words and deeds. So we absolutely agree with you 100%. But what technology do they have? How did they do this? Where was the mathematics from?
Yes.
This is really the questions. And what's interesting is, in addition, of course, this is an amazing picture, which I did take. But when you go up the Grand Gallery, there's actually these square holes on each side. And if you put them together, you could actually have a type of, we'll say, electrode type structure to
Yes.
generate energy. Now, this type of energy wasn't generated by any kind of mechanics. So I agree with you
So these are in
wholeheartedly on
parallel
that.
phase. They're actually rectangular.
But the fact is that the structures and the materials they use, like we found even in the Mayan culture, the sound frequencies, the way that they generated overtone resonances and undertone resonances, really generate energy within these structures.
Yes.
So when we carried on our musical test on the top of the Great Pyramid, the guides began to dance because they felt the vibrations coming up from below.
Yes.
And again, as musicologists, we published this in Arqueologia, which is an ENA publication of the Mexican government in 2017, that showed the actual musical quavers and semi-quavers. And so you have a musical map, so we say, that was there in the minds of those who were the architects of the pyramids, to show us that each of the chambers represent, in our logic, the different circulatory systems. The human heart is reflected in the vibrations of the king's coffer. The blood circulatory system is connected with the lymphatic and the nervous circulatory system that we see in the queen's chamber. And if you look at the whole scope of the Great Pyramid, you have actually the different stages of sound/mind elevation. And so you reach a point of higher paraphysical vibration where you feel lifted out of the chamber, or you feel that you're in a different dimension altogether.
And maybe water, because water was known to be also around, we'll say, the Temple Mount in Israel, and in Chichen Itza, amazingly, the main pyramid there, they've now discovered has a reservoir right underneath it. Why would you ever build a pyramid on top of water unless that water had a certain energy that you were using for some capacity?
So this is an early picture we took in 1978. You can see from the second pyramid in the distance, an area between the first and second pyramid of possible underground passages. And this has been the area of our research in the last 45 years.
Right, but if I can go back for just one more minute to this fantastic Russian picture, actually the ancients said that there was just as much pyramid in the top over this Lake Moris, which is a saltwater lake, as there is underneath. And they become like almost light beacons, as you can see. So we believe that the technology was maybe multifold, as they say, multi-use technology, where you had the possibility of using saltwater or freshwater energy, plus to divide water into hydrogen gas that could have been used for the structure in Dendera, that's on the side of the tomb that Eric von Däniken eventually showed could literally light up. The light bulb could light up by certain types of gases. I believe that they use basic technology and also higher vibratory technology.
And in
this, can I come in here? You're talking about the Grand Gallery and the holes that go up.
Yes.
It reminds me of a telescope that you can move it in and out to get different focal lengths. To tune it.
We're also proposing that there's you can have electrodes going on to if there was some sort of gas or water, and then positive and negative frequencies could actually create a certain energy generation.
Yes.
So Desiree has illustrated the scientific blueprints here showing at several locations the Egyptians built energy collection grids in parallel phase.
Right, this is El Fayum. This is the famous labyrinth that no one understands or knows and hasn't really found, but it's all written in Herodotus and by other scholars of ancient times. But we believe that this is really an energy generator. I mean, it had thousands of rooms on 3 different levels, but the rooms were so small, it wasn't practical for people. Maybe it was practical for an energy technology.
And one of those pyramids in Al Fayum, actually underneath it, I watched a video on this, they've got a kind of curved granite ceiling to it that looks very Old Kingdom, although that I believe is a Middle Kingdom pyramid. So
well,
something much older.
We would like to tie this into your work with Orion because, as you know, in our other work years before, we had looked at the interesting possibility that the southern star shaft was connected with the 3 stars in the belt of Orion.
Yes.
And that this was a very important aspect of showing that one star shaft points to the concept of rising with synthropy or the electrification of matter. The other star shaft going to the north points to Alpha Draconis, which is just the opposite entropy or the star degeneration.
Yes.
In essence, the Egyptians provide us really with a model of cosmic evolution, solar energy collection, water hydraulics, mathematical relationships between the Earth and the Sun in terms of actual distances, in star shafts that can look at the distance belt of Orion some 1,400 light years with actual precision. To do this, as I said in many of my lectures, you need about 30 Einsteins, one after the other, to do the calculations.
Yeah.
But what we've also looked at is Linda Shelley has come out with some of the interpretation of the Mayan culture, and she saw very similar to what Dr. Hurtak mentions in the Keys of Enoch, that one side points towards Orion and perhaps the Queen's chamber in that structure of the Great Pyramid points towards Sirius, and the other side points towards Draco, Alpha Draconis, Ursa Major, Ursa Minor, and the Mayans seem to have had a very similar cosmology to that. So, how does these pyramids around the world all relate? Maybe it is connected with the gods. And Linda Shelley said that Orion was considered the father figure for the Mayans, and that's why they even had 3 stones in their hearth to represent Orion.
Absolutely, and he was murdered and he rose again from the dead and he ascended to Orion. I mean, exactly the same story
Osiris.
as the Osiris legend.
Yeah, exactly. No,
Well, here is the picture of the actual finding in February of 1997 of the lid of the tomb of Osiris. I'm there with a ground penetrating radar, and I'm using my finger to point to the lid because it was really forbidden to talk about the find until we could get confirmation from other geologists.
Yes.
I asked Hawass for permission to dig. We had permission to explore, permission to film, but not permission to excavate. And of course, he took over the project from that point, and history is slightly different. But essentially, it's the same idea of Osiris, the Lord from the higher world who brings music and knowledge to the human world and then ascends from the dead. We have this repeated in the Catholic Encyclopedia. Osiris is considered a proto-Christ figure. But look very carefully and you'll see the lid itself. Fortunately, we were able, because of the water elevation, or I would say the water levels at that time, to make the discovery without having to dig more than a few inches.
Right.
So what does this mean? It means the Great Pyramid, as you see by the shadow in this picture, is a type of time clock. It shows us the precession of the equinoxes. It's the first really historic wonder of the ancient world to show us a cosmic cosmology. 2, it connects us with Orion, which according to the biblical text of Job in the Old Testament was one of the places of the sons of light, sons of God, B'nai Elohim. Thirdly, it connects in my and Desiree's logic with pyramid cultures to the world who realize the pyramid is a type of energy conversion system that can be used to harness natural energies. And fourthly, we believe it connects also with the symbolism of the return of the divine family.
Well, I come in there. One of the things I discovered quite recently is that the name Aaron in Hebrew is actually Orion. And that same name in Welsh is Ariel, and he's the king of the dead. And he has dogs, hunting dogs, and he lives in the western islands, like the Scilly Islands or somewhere like that. So we have this connection with Orion, with the king of the dead, and the place to the west, the place of sunset, the place of Orion, actually. In Hebrew, in Egypt, and in Wales.
Well, we honestly believe that many of the ancient peoples from Egypt, Israel area did travel around, we'll say, the Iberian Peninsula up towards Great Britain and to Wales, and that there was an ancient culture. Of course, the Celtics have been, famous for talking about the power of three, the Trinity power. So they brought with them, just like we all acknowledge, maybe, or many people acknowledge, that Joseph of Arimathea made it to Glastonbury. I mean, people traveled. If you go back to the scroll of Esther, and you realize it says in there they had one kingdom, King Ahasuerus, from India to Ethiopia. That's before Christ. I mean, this is not just some small people staying within one little, 30 square mile or something like that. I mean, there was a vast
We're talking about
route.
430 BC or BCE, which suggests that there was a mathematical understanding of sacred geometry known by world cultures.
Yes.
Through some type of navigational civilization that was able to travel. Perhaps the Phoenicians connect, and we found artifacts off Japan when we did research with the Japanese on Yonaguni. We found underwater artifacts from Egypt, and so there was a trade system clearly. And we have found also evidences of the Chinese Navy in the airports of Lower Egypt.
And also, we've drawn a line, and many people have done this, of course, now, from Egypt, from the Great Pyramid, all the way down through Zimbabwe to what's called now Adam's Calendar, where they have these crawl spaces, or also stone circles. So you go really from the Great Pyramid, you go through Nopta, which is in the southern part of Egypt, stone circles, and you go all the way down to South Africa, and it's within less than 1 degree of movement of, we'll say, the north and the
For
south.
all of East Africa. Imagine that. From Cairo, from Giza, from Heliopolis, down through Nopta, which is southern Egypt on the border of Sudan, all the way down East Africa, through Zimbabwe, of course, and we may have shown you in the past this gigantic footprint.
I remember that, yes.
we found that there were footprints
Of the giants.
that still are embedded in stone for those adventurous
Well,
enough.
that meridian running through the Great Pyramid all the way down was obviously the prime meridian for the ancient world. Just like we have
Absolutely.
the Greenwich meridian now running through Greenwich. It's not far from where we are now, actually. They had their prime meridian running through the pyramid.
And Dr. Hurtak and the Keys of Enoch have actually taken that as the prime meridian, and then taken the book of Numbers and the number of the tribes and gone around the world, and you find sacred areas. One of the places is the Isle of Flores, which is where they found the hobbits. And this also runs
2003.
Yes, I
through,
remember.
yeah,
Yes.
Homo florensis. And it also runs through Yanaguni, where they found underwater structures from an ancient time. Those are just a few of the places that if you take Egypt as the prime meridian, I love the fact that you said that, and go around the earth, you actually find these sacred grid points as well.
They all point to the coming of a new era, which we feel and share with you the idea that this will remove us away from the culture of death to a culture of peace and light. And I wanted to use this conversation with you as an opportunity to share a new book, Mind Dynamics in Space and Time, written by the late Elizabeth Rauscher with us, who was a nuclear physicist, where we did experiments with her from Stanford Research Institute
Yes.
over 7,000 kilometers underneath the sands of Egypt, looking for ancient rooms and artifacts, and we were quite successful. And I mention this book because this book represents really the real X-Files.
Right.
Top physicists and mathematicians and researchers at Stanford Research Institute in Northern California participated in 20-year studies of the power of the mind. When it's elevated to a higher vibratory state, for some supersensitive minds, one can go through space and time doors and see other artifacts. And so this book illustrates, as Desiree is showing, a group of scientists walking through one of the arches at Cairo University with the embellishments of a lighting post next to the four individuals walking through. And some 7,000 kilometers away at a certain time of day, without knowing details, Elizabeth Rauscher tuned into us, made this drawing, which you can see shows four individuals walking near a lamppost, and the embellishments are exactly the same, and the color of the doors is exactly the same. So we were able to use, in addition to technology, what is called remote viewing and remote sensing to find the missing artifacts underground. So we're at a time of tremendous change, and I think, again, I want to show this of dancing upon the top of the Great Pyramid.
Yes.
We are the pyramid capstone that's missing. It's not so much a stone, but it's a mind that's bringing together the vortex of knowledge from four directions: the geological, the cultural, historical, the linguistic, musical, and the astronomical.
Can I come in here? I also believe that it's possible for higher entities, let's call them angels, to guide you in certain ways. And we had a fantastic example of that in Britain a few years ago, when a lady was researching Richard III, and where was he buried? They knew he was buried somewhere in Leicester, but they didn't know where. And she worked out it must be this car park where there used to be a priory. And they got permission to do a dig in the car park. And the first spot they dug, they went down, they found the skeleton of what was provably Richard III. How could you know that? You know, to so exactly go, it's almost like dig here.
Well, that's what we worked with remote viewing. Not only can you see other places, but they found out during their remote viewing experiments at Stanford Research Institute that you can go back in time as well, or in some cases forward in time. In fact, they've used it for the stock market. University of Colorado at Boulder did 100% across the board study of using amateur, not even advanced, but amateur remote viewers to predict the stock market. Now, we don't recommend that for everyone, but I would love to recommend more to be able to find some of these ancient sites from people who really tune in and just to know what's going on in their lives. I think that, if I can shift a little bit, that's what's so important for all of us, to have what astronaut Edgar Mitchell said, that overview effect, where we can really see things going on around us and know how to react and know how to work in this new world.
Clearly, it's a global mind,
Yes.
a global collective consciousness. Carl Gustav Jung speaks about this. The Jesuit scholar Tyler Desjardins speaks about this. We know that our mind is part of a much greater mind of the divine. We will call it the divine spark that resides within us, but that phase of quickening to higher consciousness has been generally suppressed in the West.
Yes.
But now we're reaching a point that younger scientists, researchers, artists, and writers like ourselves are seeing the interconnection on a higher level of vibration. The pyramid temples, we believe, gives the sacred space, the sacred geometries to which the higher mind is awakened.
Yes.
And is accelerated to see briefly the higher cosmic picture.
And to tap into what Lynn McTaggart calls the field, which is a consciousness field that encircles this earth, that has information from the past, the present, and a little bit into the future, it seems, because some people have had amazing precognitive experiences. But all that information is out there for us to simply tap into. And as Dr. Tech and you have said, the pyramid itself is part of that energy. But we can also see ourselves, if we sit in a kind of a lotus position, we become our own pyramid and can bring in certain types of energy.
So besides Orion, the other mystery is the connection with the planet Mars. And in 1973, I released the official pictures of the Mariner 9 probe of Mars, what is called the B-frames, showing these massive structures in the Elysium Quadrangle. So was there a connection between a sister planet and our planet through sacred geometry? I would answer in the positive, and published in several journals such as the Annals of Air and Space Law from McGill University in Canada, this article, Consequences for Space Law, Making of Water Discoveries on Mars, which is to say we have found interesting details of a backstory to why the Cairo, Egypt is called Al-Qahira in Arabic, which means Mars, the spacious ones. So besides mirroring the heavens and Orion, more specifically, Mars was selected as a planet to be understood as a planet of war or planet of destruction. So we would not go the way of destruction.
Something interesting there. It's very obvious to me. I don't know why scientists won't admit this, that the asteroid belt is the remains of a planet that should be between Mars and Jupiter.
Correct.
And you can't say it's just an accumulation of dust that form together to form small bodies. We know that some of those asteroids are made of iron. I've got an iron meteorite, which is probably part of that. And you get iron in the core of a planet, not in the crust. So there must have been a planet there, which raises the question, what happened? How did it get destroyed? Why? What caused that event? And I think we have to understand that we're living in a damaged solar system. It's like it's lost an arm or something.
That's right.
It's lost one of its planets. We need to know why that happened.
Well, we published extensively on Mars as a possible remnant of a previous civilization.
Yes.
And of course, this wasn't taken seriously until a few years ago. An Israeli scholar by the name of Chaim Shad indicated in a book yet to be published, but privately in circulation, that there was life on Mars and that the Americans and Israeli are in contact with active intelligence in the present sense of the evolutionary history.
Is that why Elon Musk is so keen to go and build a city on Mars?
That's right. So, Adrian, we're very happy to be here with your great contributions, your great books, your insights, and to add it to this collection will be a new book we're going to get to you when it's translated into English. That's now in Portuguese, entitled Intergalactic Space Law, which is the preparation going on behind the scenes in what is called disclosure. Governments such as UK and the American government, and of course those of South America and Asia, have brought out many of the declassified documents that we were being visited by unknown, elusive space objects. But now, after 75 years, we are reaching a point where this information is now being distilled, and those involved with what is called space law, those involved with the possibility of cosmic civilizations, as astronaut Mitchell would call them, know that we're very close at hand of making contact. And we believe that we need to know more of our history, that our ancestors did accept as basic knowledge, we're not alone in the universe.
Yeah.
But they may be here mainly because we have now had the technology for nuclear weapons. And it seems, especially from even reports around the northern part of the USA and from Rendlesham Forest, Bentwaters affairs, that they really, really, really are not happy with any kind of nuclear weaponry. And that's what's called their attention to this planet and to be watching what's taking place around us. So we really do need to understand how we need to work together, because ultimately no extraterrestrial intelligence really wants to work with primitive people that their favorite pastime is tribal warfare. So we need to grow beyond that, and I think that that's what the ancients were trying to tell us. That's what the power of Christ was trying to tell us. We need to see ourselves as a collective humanity, working, sharing, and really cohabiting together, and then we will be able to understand more of what the ancients said about the Great Pyramid and going into other planetary systems.
Well, as I understand it from my work on the Book of Revelation, we're not going to have much choice about this. They're going to impose it on us.
That's right.
All the bad guys are going to be rounded up.
A house cleaning, a galactic house cleaning, so to speak.
Yes.
You know, Adrian, in this book, Giza's Industrial Complex, I actually show one of the artifacts, most amazing, we found in Egypt back in the 70s. It's a piece of synthesized crystal in the shape of a heart. But when we analyzed it at Jet Propulsion Lab, which is a branch of Caltech,
Yes.
we found that it had a bluish-green vibration of something on the order of 30
Gamma rays
per minute, which is to say it was still active after thousands of years. And scientists could not understand how the Egyptians could synthesize glass to such a unique level of texturizing, and why it would throw off a blue-green light or vibratory glow in the dark. Again, this is a question that suggests the Egyptians were aware and used the underground storage systems in Saqqara for many of their energy experiments, which would include the radiation levels that the French Egyptologists found.
Would this tie in with Atlantis and Atlantean technology?
The misuse of Atlantean technology. In other words, we are told by Plato and others, of course, that Egypt is a byproduct of a super civilization. Of course, the etymology of Atlantis could be any type of civilization that is ocean-born or in the Atlantic. But clearly the illustration was the misuse of technology. So in practical language, in our scope of research, we seem to be going from Atlantis 1 to Atlantis 2, of repeating the story of civilization without ethics, science without the divine spark, knowledge without the sense of responsibility of sharing this properly with respect to Mother Earth or Mother Nature. We are a composite of being a celestial image, a solar creation from the dust of the universe, but also in a planetary sense of the human anthropological nature, the face of the divine, of which we believe is also shared by our cosmic counterparts. We will call them the cosmic cultures. We believe that we're very close to what Revelation tells us by John the Divine, of seeing the understanding of the 24 elders. We would call them the 24 dimensions of higher creativity opening suddenly to the human race, who is prepared to advance to the University of the Cosmos.
And I just want to add, though, for everyone out there, we feel it goes from alpha to omega, but then there's also a new alpha. So that's the important thing, that it's, Dr. Hurtak says we live in an open-ended universe, so once it ends, there's a new beginning. It's like a vortex threshold that takes us into the next reality.
And what does John tell us in chapter 22, the last chapter of Revelation? It means we will no longer, to quote him, we will no longer need sunlight, for light will be upon us. Light will be emanating from our face. It means what we will advance from humankind into spacekind. We will advance, to use the metaphors of the New Testament, from normal humanity into a Christed humanity. Christ meaning anointed light, anointed wisdom, anointed love. We believe that this change, no matter how, shall we say, horrendous it is into the minds of people who live in fear, is an actual image of hope, resolution of conflict, and a culture of peace and enlightenment that will come from the higher universe. And this is what we detail, as you do, so uniquely in your books of art and science. We are at the moment, really, of being the capstone upon the pyramids of the world cultures. We are at the moment of being the Christed awareness of what evolution is all about from the standpoint of supernature, the nature beyond normal nature.
I've got something else I'd like to share with you that actually confirms something you wrote in the Book of Enoch.
Yeah.
Keys of Enoch.
Yeah.
And that is that you're aware of the electric universe idea and the idea that these Birkeland currents in space, and they come in pairs, they twist around each other, and that this new idea is that the sun is travelling along one of these, and Sirius is its companion on the other, and they go round and round, and they go round an axis which actually points towards Arcturus, so that we are actually in orbit in a cosmic sense with the 26,000 year cycle. It's nothing to do with the pull of the moon. It's to do with this rotational, about this axis that points towards Arcturus.
Well, what's interesting about Arcturus, as you've probably studied, they consider it part of a Arcturus stream. In other words, it's actually, as you said, it's not part of the whole Milky Way, that it's actually coming in. And even the ancients, as well as the Keys of Enoch, did talk about the fact that it's the shepherding mechanism. So we're kind of connected with this shepherding mechanism that's literally penetrating our Milky Way. So it's almost like a higher forces are coming in to assist us.
I'll share this video with you where I got this, but the Arcturus itself doesn't go in a straight line. It too goes in a spiral, the helix, and that helix, the center of it, points towards the Pleiades.
Wow,
So
that's great.
we have this connection, spirals within spirals within spirals. It's amazing once you get into these ideas and you begin to understand that we are part of something so grand, so enormous, so magnificent, that it blows away our science completely.
So if Sirius is part of the Queen's Chamber alignment, if Orion is part of the King's Chamber alignment, that means that the Pleiades is also above or connected also with the Great Pyramid, but we don't see it through the chambers. So we also honor the Pleiades and Orion and Arcturus, the main star systems Dr. Hurtak experienced from his connection that he had in 1973.
I've had several experiences, and I want to share this with the audience, where we're talking about Arcturus and the Pleiades. I'm standing next to the pyramids in Tulum, Mexico, and I was singing and chanting ancient Egyptian and Hebrew mantras of divine, shall we say, inspiration, and suddenly light appears around my body. A man is taking a picture of his wife. You can see this at the lower side of the picture, and as he snaps the photograph, he captures in a millisecond the light that comes around my body. And this is a sign of what I call the superluminal light that the ancient mystics understood, and we see here in this one historic picture of the Pentecost experience of the disciples all with light over their heads. I believe in history repeats itself, and that we're going into a cycle where it is possible, through the use of a language of light or a consciousness awakened to the greater light, greater supernature, that momentarily we can step into the light. And this was the whole experience of why these pyramids were also sacred chambers. As a matter of fact, I want to share one of the sacred mantras we used when we made the light glow inside the Great Pyramid, which is, in the ancient prophetic language, the king of the heavens, of the heavenly Jerusalem. Melech Shemaim Jerusalem. Permit me now to sing this 7 times for the 7 chakras of the 7 seals. Melech Shemaim Jerusalem. 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 You can feel the power of the mantra, and this is just in a basic home studio. You can imagine in the Great Pyramid where you have the acoustical chambers and the proper arrangements for the density of the quavers and semi-quavers. And so when I was singing as a music specialist musicologist, suddenly the light manifested. And I'm saying this, and I'm sharing this with all of you who see this conversation, that as we use the original language of the prophets and mystics, whether it's in the Greek, whether it's in the Hebrew, whether it's in the Aramaic, or any of the ancient languages, including Sanskrit, there is a whole vibratory sequence that opens the mind to a much higher level of experience. And I believe that the so-called peak experience the parapsychologists speak of was to allow us to realize these temples and pyramids were left behind as ways where we could build the energy, kindle the energy, sublimate the energy, and then send it forth through the pyramidal chambers, which act as we would call a networking of communication throughout the world.
Right, so we actually did computer musical testing in the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid using white noise, pink noise, and also other sounds with live singers and with equipment. And what we found is in addition to overtones within the King's Chamber, there were undertones. And I believe some of those undertone vibrations will actually take the mind into an alpha and maybe even a theta state, to put it into the state of more meditative and divine awareness.
As a matter of fact, we have several CDs or MP3s available called the Capstone of the Great Pyramid.
The Living Capstone or the Opening of the Great Pyramid, two different
ones.
ones.
Before you go, I want you to give me all the details of your website and where people can find these books and videos and tapes, and I'll put it in the comments.
Well, I appreciate that very much. I think you can tell by our conversation that we have had the privilege of working with archaeology, geology, linguistics, music and musicology, mathematics, as well as cosmology. And of course, we have shared this in several documentaries around the world. But it's interesting, Adrian, that we both come together knowing that there is a higher chapter yet to be opened. And that is, shall we say, the next chapter of revelation to the next chapter of the human race, connecting itself with those who come from the Pleiades and Orion.
But going back also to the book of Daniel, it says at the end that the true knowledge will become abundant, and I believe that's what we're all doing. Adrian, with all your books and others, bringing out this knowledge about the past so we know who we are and we also know where we're going.
I have a belief, it's more than a belief, that St. John the Divine, who wrote the Revelation, or recorded it, was the same soul as Daniel in a different time frame. But Jesus didn't come into this world on his own, hoping for the best. He had his friends with him. He had people who he'd worked with before come in with him. And I suspect that if we only knew it, we might find that some of the people we know are those same people come back.
We did a commentary on an ancient Coptic manuscript called the Pistis Sophia, and it actually says that he placed his 12 disciples to the earth in time for him to be there as well. Yes. So it actually acknowledges that.
So when we say there were ordinary fishermen, or maybe there were builders or tax collectors, that might have been true in this life, but we don't know what they were on a higher level, on other experiences, different lifetimes. They were very advanced people, and all it needed was to bring that out again, to connect with the Holy Ghost, and it all came out again. And
now maybe coming back again. That's what we're all looking for, wondering when, of course.
Well, one of the things I've realized recently was in the Acts of the Apostles, it says that as they were looking at him rising up, he disappeared into a cloud. Well, a cloud, it's not an ordinary cloud. The same word, nephile, for cloud, is also nebula in Latin, and the aura around him would be his cloud, his nebula, and he vanished dissolved into this nebula and disappeared from sight.
Well, we went to see, in person, so to speak, the Cloth of Turin, which is in Turin, Italy, on 2 different occasions, and it only opens occasionally, as you know, but it is free, and so we were blessed to be able to go see that, and we believe that it really does, and we've talked about this on many radio shows, that it literally showed how his matter body can go back into a light energy body, and now scientists are looking at how light can produce matter. We say the higher forces of intelligence know already how also you can go from matter to light. Melchizedek was one of the main figures on this. If you read the Bible, especially in the book of Hebrews, and many people don't take this seriously, but it said he was fatherless and motherless, which means he had that higher body and was able to materialize here. He wasn't born here.
So we see this in the face of Christ in the cloth of Turin, analyzed by technology developed by our colleague Don Lynn of Jet Propulsion Lab back in the 1970s. He permitted me to have an actual copy of the original studies, but you see the three-dimensional image, which cannot happen if it was just painted on the cloth. And many of the critics of the shroud changed their position, knowing the fuller details of the inner aspects of the shroud. Now, the reason we're showing this is because there is a perfect symmetry around the face, and the three-dimensionality would not appear if this was just a painting or fabrication. We have found also around the face details written in Hebrew and Latin and Greek.
There's like a type of olive, some people say, in the neck area, which Dr. Jack actually had written way before anyone knew this. He showed it in one of the pictures of his book.
In 1973. So when this came out in 2003, it was like personal validation, that the shroud validates the keys of Enoch, the keys of Enoch validate the shroud. And now we're releasing, after some 40 years, a book entitled Salvator Mundi. This is the words, the painting of which was used by
Leonardo da Vinci, and the most recent find. But what the book contains is 76 names of Christ, like King of Kings, I am He, my beloved Son,
Prince of Peace,
all these, and to detail why these are significant names and how it relates to our own evolution and connection to Christ.
St. Luke, who was a physician, put this at the beginning of the gospel. Why would he list all these names? Well, these names represent the different degrees of energy, authority, education, and wisdom that can be shared as we grow in spirit. And so this book, perfectly illustrated by European and American artists, shows the other dimensional aspects of the divine family. So to bring this full measure, we're not simply looking at an empty universe, but one teeming with life. We're not simply looking at abstract intelligence, but intelligence of the cosmic cultures that have achieved the divine spark of the Christ nature.
And I just want to emphasize, when Jesus was born in Bethlehem, then his family had to take him to Egypt. So why did Jesus go first to Egypt before he went up to Nazareth?
I believe he was later sent to boarding school to Egypt at age 12, like many of us have experienced. But the name Luke, actually Luce, means light.
Right.
So Saint Light is writing about these light.
Well, you're very gifted in understanding the deeper etymology, and for those who are interested, please turn to the Revelation of John the Divine, chapter 10, and you will see that Egypt is mentioned in terms of the larger story of the story of one who was crucified, but also one who's identified with what we will call the passageway, or the grand avenue that exists between the Sphinx and the pyramids, that we were able to explore in the 1990s and find really the chamber of Osiris. So there is a hidden Egyptology that was understood by John the Divine, and he's explaining, as you all know, that this is a story of a much higher sense of divine grace and glory that God is sharing with us, that we're all on the journey of life. Our soul comes in through birth, our soul goes through the pains of life, and at the end of life we have the opportunity to take the higher path of ascension if we see the message of God within our life and our dedication to help humanity. We are, shall we say, ad astra, going to the stars. We are, in a sense of inner experience, all students of the heavenly passage of life into eternity.
Yes, yes.
I want to share now with our audience some of our publications that are available. We have covered many disciplines, and again, those of you interested, please write to the Academy for Future Science,
keysofenoch.org.
And also, Academy for Future Science, of course, publishes in English, French, German, Italian, and please be aware that either through Amazon or through our publication sites, you can order Mind Dynamics. This is the real X-Files, showing how government scientists were able to show mind over matter, of being able to go into the resources under the ocean, under the deserts of Egypt, and find keys of information showing that there was a much greater super civilization at one time.
And also Giza's industrial complex, which ties in, and it really does talk about how hydrogen energy should be used right now today to help us get over this horrible energy shortage that the whole of Europe and the rest of the world are facing.
According to the late Dr. Patrick Flanagan, he writes in a little statement regarding this book, the evidence of the saltwater battery mastered by the ancient Egyptians is the energetic Rosetta Stone that brings many of the missing pieces of Egypt together. So again, this book really sets the record of showing what scientists with serious credentials are working on and fortunately have shared with us. Another publication yet to be in the English language, Intergalactic Space Law and Intergalactic Space Diplomacy. The keys of Enoch are now in 30 languages. So regardless where you are, if you want the keys in your language, please write to us and we will facilitate a response.
But we thank you, Adrian. You've done a tremendous work. Your collection behind us of all the amazing information you've put out to the world. So we thank you for this opportunity.
And what we want to emphasize is how close we are to revelations that will come regarding a previous civilization on Mars. Extrasolar intelligence already within our solar system, going over these areas of atomic testing and research, telling us that this is not the way to go. And finally, the inner experience of knowing that God's Word has a joy and purpose, and that Christ is really the way shower for this kingdom of creation, showing us that we must bring together a new science and a new spirituality, the Alpha and Omega that will lead to, as Desiree said, the next phase of the heavens and the earth, what John the Divine writes about in Revelation, seeing the tree, symbol of the kingdom with all of its branches of glory. We want to thank you for your time and your great work on Orion and in so many subject areas that match our findings. And we want to thank you for carrying on this work, which has been very difficult to bring science and spirituality into this great marriage that John the Divine speaks of.
Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to come here and to tell us about your most recent work and these amazing pictures that you've got. I feel very gratified to know you. Someone else has had the same sort of experiences as I have, because there's not many of us, or if there are, they're keeping it to themselves and not telling us.
Well, I'd like the audience to see in closing this wonderful masterpiece that you have here in your studio of John the Divine's picture of the cosmos, emphasizing Orion.
I'll pass this to you.
Okay, I was
Let
going
me
to say,
hold
you
this
can just put
carefully,
it in.
but this is really a masterpiece of masterpieces.
It's by my Swedish friend, Bengt Alfredsson. If you point it at the camera.
Okay, lovely.
You see the eye and the points to Orion,
Yes.
the hand that's extended, of course, sees that.
There's the Alpha and Omega figure with the belt of Orion on his cummerbund. 7 candles, the 7 lights.
And this is the breaking of the 7 seals, that is the use of sacred language and sacred music, and then bringing about sacred wisdom. And finally, the ability to see through the mystery of history that there's a heavenly supernature, there's a heavenly blueprint of life, that evolution doesn't stop with Mother Earth but continues in the cosmos and the heavens.
Can I just point out another little detail that most people won't know because it's not included in the book? To the far right, you see on the door a kind of angelic figure. Can you see that?
Yes.
Ben put that in, and that represents me.
Well, you are a forerunner, and you are a witness. This is one of our books, Keys of Enoch, a new one that's released that says, "Thou shalt be the witness." That we know this cosmic knowledge, we see now the new evidence of historic knowledge being found underneath the earth, so to speak, of world cultures, and putting the two together, we open the door of space and time to life and eternity. And we thank you so much. We thank the artist who gave this picture to you in the higher reality that we collectively represent. And we ask all of you to look at the new information coming out. A magnificent Renaissance is before us as we put together the details of a new heaven and a new earth. Thanks be to God, thanks be to the Christ, the cosmic Christ, and thanks be to the sacred celebration of taking the higher path and showing love for all humanity. May we be blessed, and may we excel in the great leap forward, the great opening of the heavens. The Melech Shemayim Yerushalayim, the King of the heavenly Jerusalem, is before us. Let us celebrate.
Amen.
Amen.